This money reset was quite illuminating. I'm going to start off with the summary of what I learned before I get too granular with the details of each exercise, as well as sharing the spreads in my bullet journal. The beauty of these authenticity resets is that they are very specific to each individual person, so everyone will get something different out of the money reset, for example. What I talk about in this video, it may resonate with you, but it also may not resonate with you, and that is perfectly okay. I have my own unique set of circumstances right now and things that I'm trying to work through. The things that I'm working on may be very different from the things that you're working on, and that is totally okay. The first time I did a money reset was in February of 2021. There were two main things that kept coming up over and over again. One was that my view of money had switched quite significantly since leaving full-time work. So before I left full-time work, I was very into capitalism. I bought a lot of stuff. I spent a lot of money. I was very, very hyper-focused on making money. I wanted to make as much money as possible so I could live a more and more extravagant lifestyle. But then the extravagance stopped bringing me joy, and that was when I left my full-time job and I did a complete 180. I was very anti-consumerism and trying to live a more minimalist lifestyle. My mindset had completely shifted to a place where I almost thought that money would inevitably bring greed and corruption. And I almost looked at money, a very neutral thing, a thing that can be very helpful in your life, as a villain. So I was villainizing money and not really having a neutral view of it anymore when I was doing my first money reset. I didn't realize that this was happening. Of course, I knew the shift in my mindset, but I didn't actually realize I was demonizing money until I did my money reset. A lot of my internal struggles about money also came to light during this first reset. At this time, I still prioritized paid work and I didn't like myself for it, along with the struggle that came with trying to find my new identity as someone who works part-time, who doesn't make a full-time salary, and who doesn't spend on extravagant things. Up until the time that I quit my full-time job, my self-worth was really tied to the work that I was doing in terms of my job title, the amount of money that I was making, and also my extravagant purchases. And now that I wanted something different and I was going in a different direction, one that felt more aligned with my inner compass, I really had to contend with my ego and what that was telling me in terms of my inner critic. Because I was someone who prioritized money pretty much for my entire life, it was very easy for me to slip into a scarcity mindset when I stopped making a full-time salary. So that was something that I definitely wanted to work on coming out of my first money reset. I wanted to find my self-worth in something other than how much money I was making, and as well, I wanted to return to an abundance mindset. My second money reset happened in November of 2022, so this is almost 2 years after my first reset, and my learnings or realizations from this reset were very, very different. At this time, I was in a pretty deep shame spiral because I had made some investments in my Play stock account that really went south. I had a hard time with that. I was checking my stock accounts every day and being hyper focused on the numbers and how much money I had lost. I felt really weird about it because these investments were not things that were characteristic of me. Every time I've done this in the past, I've wanted to play around with some money and try to pick individual stocks. It's never worked in my favor, so I mainly 99% of the time actually, I stick to index funds or ETFs that are like a basket of many, many stocks. I don't try to pick individual ones. But for some reason, I have a hard time learning this lesson, and so I did it again. I picked some individual stocks. Most of them, of course, did not do well, and I was in a shame spiral when I did my second money reset. This was where I realized that I was taking unnecessary risk for gains that I didn't even need. That shifted things back into perspective, and I also tried to draw upon everything that I know about money and investing, and I tried to look at it from the perspective, well, what would I tell my best friend? How can I be compassionate to myself about the mistakes that I've made? And I decided that I will just not make the same mistake going forward. I'm going to instead focus on my very safe and boring investments, which is perfectly fine. I don't need to add excitement in this part of my life. And this was very settling for me because I was returning to a place where I felt a lot of groundedness and a lot of safety and security. I've been investing since my early 20s, so I'm very comfortable with investing. But again, these are funds like index funds and ETFs that comprise an entire basket of stocks, and I've never been someone who even believes in picking individual stocks. After this money reset, I stopped beating myself up for this mistake, or when I would start sinking into the shame spiral again, I was quicker to pull myself out of it. There was also a very concrete action item that came out of my second money reset, and that is that I stopped checking my portfolio. For a while, I was checking on a daily basis, and then I decided to check it once in a while. I think I was doing monthly or quarterly, and then I stopped checking altogether. And I feel much better now. I never sold those stocks that are in like a deep loss. Some of them have bounced back a little bit, some haven't. I'm just going to write that off as a loss. If they come back up, that's great. If they don't, I will use the sea of red as a reminder not to do that again. That brings us to our third money reset, which is the one that I just completed. It is December of 2023 when I'm recording this video. When I came into this money reset, I was very excited because I thought I knew where it was going, and again, it was a complete 180. There were two main realizations. The first realization, which I'll talk about just briefly, I might do a whole video on it because I do have a lot to say about this, but I don't want to spend too much time on it because I think this realization is something that would have been expected given the trajectory of my relationship with money. And that was that I had a couple of very different experiences with the word enough. Throughout my entire life, one of my guiding principles about money is to spend less than I make. But that also meant that as my salary kept increasing, I thought I could spend more and more and more money without really any consequences. And while I didn't experience any financial consequences from my spending in the past, I did experience a lot of unforeseen consequences in terms of feeling really bad about myself because I was contributing so much to consumerism, wasting so much money, and buying things I didn't even want or need, accumulating tons of clutter, and contributing to landfills. I also felt very wasteful because a lot of the things that I bought I never even used, and I ended up donating or reselling. So there was a lot of internal turmoil because I knew I was behaving in a way that wasn't aligned with my inner compass. Up until that point, my sense of enough really focused on the income side of the equation. But when I started feeling unfulfilled by all of the stuff I was bringing into my home or all the lavish experiences that I was spending money on, when I didn't feel happy about any of that anymore, I started to look at the other side of the enough equation, and that is, how much stuff do I really need? What is my point of enough in terms of stuff? I went back to that idea of the fulfillment curve, and I have an entire video on that, so I won't go into too much detail in this video. During the money reset that I just completed, I realized that my focus on enough was no longer how much money is enough, how can I make as much money as possible to support the lifestyle that I think I want. It shifted to the side of the stuff itself. So how much stuff is enough versus how much income is enough? And also, do I actually want an extravagant lifestyle, or am I just spending money because I have it? The other realization that I had, I definitely was not expecting, and that is that I have a very hard time receiving gifts or generosity with grace. At the beginning of this money reset, I had a conversation. It was actually during book club. A few of us in the group are of Asian heritage, and we reminisced about our parents fighting over the bill. This happened a lot in my household. My dad was very generous with paying for the bill, especially when he went out with colleagues or friends or family. He would always fight over the bill, and it was very hard to treat him to something. And because I grew up with my dad, I saw this behavior modeled, and I think I must have internalized it. And I do plan to connect with my therapist on this because it has just become such a source of discomfort in my own life. Even when I go out now and someone treats me to something, even if it's something small like a donut or a bubble tea, I'll be like, oh, please don't do that, or it's okay, or don't worry about it, we'll just like pay for our own, or I can treat you. For some reason, I could not simply say, that is so sweet, thank you so much. Not only do I feel strange about it in the moment, I then feel beholden to that person. I make a mental note that I have to pay next time. And I'm trying not to do that, to feel beholden to someone because they did something nice for me. That means I have to do something nice for them. Of course, I want a friendship or a relationship to be give and take. I don't want to always be taking and not giving back, but I want to give back out of generosity, not because I feel obligated. And this is something that I've worked on in the past with holiday gift exchanges and things like that. I really wanted to get out of the pattern of giving gifts just because it's Christmas. That's something that came up that was really fascinating, but also very difficult. And it brought up a lot of my past behaviors that I'm quite embarrassed about. I know I've made people feel uncomfortable because I offer to pay like so insistently. Now I prefer to each pay for our own rather than having this really strange exchange. And when I do feel that like bubble of generosity come up, I want to be able to give generously without expecting anything in return or without the other person feeling like they need to treat me next time. I just want it to be like a one-off thing where I feel like doing something nice for someone and so I do it. I also want to receive with grace and not have this awkward exchange where the other person is made to feel like it's so hard to do something nice for me. So that was definitely something very interesting and very unexpected that came up during this money reset. Now let's go through the granular, the nitty-gritty of the specific exercises, which ones I did, and also go through my bullet journal spreads. My bullet journal theme for the month was Lucky Bamboo. I thought this was fitting because bamboo is a symbol for abundance and wealth in Chinese culture. I kept the cover spread pretty simple, and I chose another quote from outside of my book. This one is by Lao Tzu. Lao Tzu is a Chinese philosopher, so this is a translation to English. This is the one that really resonated with me. It is, if you realize that you have enough, you are truly rich. And that is definitely my mentality and mindset these days. I didn't like the way I laid out the contents in my food reset, so I decided to change it up for the money reset, and I have the exercises just in one column, which I much prefer. The first section in this book is Arrive. There are 3 exercises in this section. They are short and sweet, and I did do them all. For the reaction section, I didn't even try to read the book itself this time around because my inner critic was so vocal with the previous chapter. Instead, I went straight to the bonus content. I went to the icon for the money chapter and I clicked on the play button for the introduction that accompanies this chapter of the book. I listened to myself reading this chapter and I jotted down my reactions from there. This is where I had that aha moment that I talked about earlier, where income needs to be higher than spending in the world of Leslie money philosophy, but I shifted from how much money is enough to how much stuff is enough. My word cloud ended up being 8 different sets of 4 words that I associate with money. Things like hope, abundance, wealth, and enough. And that's kind of like the top of the bamboo for me. That's like the ideal. And then as we get lower and lower in the bamboo, I have things like excess, greed, classism, and corruption. This ended up being a really interesting exercise, and I might want to look at my groupings of words a little more closely and see if anything else comes up for me. The next exercise was pendulum, and once again what I did was I printed off the worksheet companion for this exercise so I didn't have to write out the dualities, and I cut it to size, and then I drew the dots on each line signifying approximately where I feel I am in relation to the sentences on either end. The next section is observe, and I spent 7 days observing myself in terms of my patterns of spending. One thing that came out of the observations is that I don't have to spend that much money to derive a ton of enjoyment and pleasure that lasts for many days after that. So that was a really interesting observation for me. Whereas before, I was experiencing a lot of lifestyle creep when I was working full time, and I felt like I needed to spend more and more money to derive pleasure or enjoyment or fulfillment. Whereas now I know I can spend very little, sometimes nothing at all, and I derive even more enjoyment than I did before when I was buying maybe like a luxury handbag or an extravagant vacation. The patterns exercise is one big text block, but I did use the sentence stems that were provided in the chapter. And I'll just read the last sentence I wrote, and that is that it feels good to be selective and intentional with money. Explore is the third section, and this is where we pick 2 or 3 exercises out of 10 offered to complete. And I decided to do 2 exercises. I knew coming in that I wanted to do recurrences. This exercise took up a page in my bullet journal, but I also did an entire video on it, so I'm not going to go into too much detail in this particular video. The second exercise that I chose is an exercise called Enough, and this is probably my favorite exercise in this chapter. What you do in this exercise is you pick one item from each room in your home and you answer questions about the item, like where you got it, how many of the item is enough, how much would you sell it for, etc. And what was really interesting about this exercise that didn't come up the previous times that I've done this exercise is that I picked out all functional items this time. In the past, I think I've pulled out more sentimental items or things that really meant something to me that I would never sell. The majority of things, though, that I gravitated towards during this iteration of me doing this exercise were things that I would definitely sell because they are not sentimental to me. But before I sold them, I would definitely repurchase them because they are so functional and they bring me so much continued joy and fulfillment, or even just like convenience, that I definitely still want to have this item in my life, but it doesn't necessarily have to be this particular item. They're more functional than sentimental. This exercise also asks you to identify 3 things that you can't get enough of. And at first I was like, oh, maybe like time alone or quality time with hubby, but I realized that I can get enough of those things. I really value my alone time, but I also value my time with people, and too much of one or the other really sets my balance off. So instead, for the 3 things that I cannot get enough of, that would be laughter, happy memories, and creative sparks. Next, we move into the most difficult section, and that is connect. There are 5 exercises in this section, and I did do them all. I was feeling a lot of resistance with the memories exercise, so instead of listing out memories, because I have a lot of memories about money, I decided to focus in on the memory of my dad fighting over the bill, as well as me doing this myself in my 20s and 30s especially. I didn't really hone in on specific memories here. It was more a collection of memories or a pattern of memories. It ended up kind of turning into a poem, but also just like random thoughts. For disentangling, I really wanted to focus in on that one concept of me feeling compelled to treat and decline being treated, and I wanted to see where the disentangling exercise would take me. Perceptions and perspective, again, I put on one page. I really enjoyed that aspect of the way I laid out my food reset as well. This time, I really only had 2 things that my inner critic were telling me in terms of that aspect that I wanted to really connect with in this section. And then in the adjacent column, I wrote out what my best friend wants to remind me. Interconnections was again one big block of text because there was so much to think about in this exercise. And there were so many interconnections with different areas of my life, and I really wanted to jot down all of them. With pendulum redux, once again, I printed out the worksheet with the dualities and I cut it down to size so I could just draw the dot on the line between the 2 statement pairs, and I have a few notes about that as well. I really love the looking up exercise, and I can share the 5 statements that I wrote down because I think you'll see how they tie in with the rest of what I talked about in this video. So the sentence stem is, I see myself as someone who ... and in this exercise we're asked to complete this statement 5 times. So I wrote down, I see myself as someone who gives generously without expectation, receives graciously without feeling beholden, gives because I want to, not because I feel obligated to, is selective and intentional with spending, understands that money provides choices and options. The last exercise in this section and in this chapter is treasures, and once again, these are a series of sentence stems that you can use to draw out any nuggets that you learned about yourself throughout the course of this chapter. This is one of my favorite exercises because I love gathering up those little acorns and storing them up for when I need a reminder of what I learned. The last page is just my money reset summary, and that's what I talked about at the beginning of this video when I talked about my first, second, and third resets. Before I end off this video, I do want to flip back to the contents page and show you how I colored in that cloud. Money is the second chapter in my book, Authenblissity Reset. These chapters were designed to take around a month to complete, but you can do them faster or slower depending on what pace works for you. I decided to go through the chapters a little bit quicker because I wanted to film a recap video as well as an intro video for the chapter that's coming next. So I completed my money reset between December 2nd and 18th. And as you can see, the color associated with this chapter is gray because I found this chapter very challenging, especially with what came up for me. I'm super glad it came up, but I wasn't expecting it, and I had to work through a lot of stuff this month, especially with it being December and a month where giving is very expected. You almost feel obligated to, and there are a lot of opportunities as well during this month to receive, and I really had to work hard at receiving graciously. I felt very uncomfortable most of the month as a result, so I did find this chapter incredibly challenging, but I'm so glad I did it, and I'm so glad I had the realizations that I had because now I can start working through them. That is going to be it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. I know this was a long one, and I think these recaps are always going to be a bit on the longer side because I have so much to say about the exercises and the way I moved through them. Once again, this is one of the chapters in my book, Authenblissity Reset. If you're interested in checking it out, I will leave the link down below, and I will be back very soon with the introduction to my next reset, which is media. Thank you again so much for watching, and I will see you all very soon in the next video. Until then, please take care, and bye for now.